Decision-making is a tremendous challenge, but it is a skill that you have to get very good at if you're going to be successful in your business. You know that. So how do you get better at making decisions? That is the topic of conversation with my guest today, Bessi Graham. Bessi is an award-winning entrepreneur with over 20 years experience working with business owners, governments, and large funding bodies to bring doing good and making money back together. Very interesting career she's had, from the grassroots of sitting in the dirt working with business owners in the Pacific Islands to the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. Bessi has seen it all and brings an unparalleled perspective on what makes change happen. We have a tremendously interesting conversation about how to make good decisions and the importance of clarifying your vision and your strategy, and how that clarity then helps you to sort through the noise of the various inputs that you're getting on a daily basis to identify the key decision from which other decisions will then cascade. Bessi gives a number of practical examples to help you to understand this concept and how you can apply it in your business. That's the first half of our conversation. The second half of the conversation then pivots to your legacy and how you need to combine your time, your talent, and your treasure with what you're actually interested in order to create a legacy that you can feel good about. Bessi has experience working with companies on both the decision-making part of the discussion and the legacy part of the discussion. And so you'll find content that will be very beneficial to you in both parts of our interview. So enjoy my conversation with Bessi. Feel free to share it with other people that you know would benefit from listening. Of course, there's links in the show notes to contact Bessi. And thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Bessi, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you so much.
Why is decision-making so difficult for business leaders?
I think the primary reason it feels difficult and overwhelming is that it's very hard to decipher or figure out which decisions are most important. So we feel that overwhelmed because there's so many moving parts, and often the things that are loudest aren't necessarily the most important. But it is just down to that complexity or complicatedness that is in the mix with all of the competing interests and voices that we have coming at us as a leader in business.
Okay, so you're saying something interesting there, the loud voices. How do the best leaders discern the difference between volume and importance?
Yeah. I think you really have to have that ability to pull back and look at the whole system and be able to see, okay, is this something that actually by sorting it out or making this decision or listening to that noise, I will unlock a whole bunch of other things? Or is it something that's actually not a strong lever for us to pull? Because again, that the urgent things aren't necessarily the most important. And as a leader, making those judgment calls, being able to actually be confident enough to examine what's in front of you and decide what is most important and where you will give your attention and what you will ignore is actually part of our job.
How long should I listen before I decide?
In some ways, I think that really depends on the level of understanding that you have of the context that you're operating in. If we understand both the context we're operating in and where we're wanting to go as an organisation, then you can pretty quickly hone in on whether this is actually something that is going to be able to help us get to where we want to go and whether it's something worth paying attention to. So I think, again, it comes down to that we have to have done the work. We need to be very clear on where we're going, really deeply have that mastery of the context and environment we're operating in, because that is where you can then make very quick, aligned, efficient decisions.
Where do leaders tend to miss important aspects of context in your experience?
So I think the biggest challenge comes down to being caught up in our own perception or projecting onto the context or onto other people what we think is important, or assuming that they have dealt with or have the level of mastery we have. So in reading that context, the problem comes down to if you haven't actually understood the audience of who you're speaking with, or who is speaking at you, if it's about that loud volume. So really tuning into and making sure that the way you engage is appropriate for that audience within your context is a critical aspect. The level of empathy and really just being able to say, okay, this person thinks this is really important for a reason. So what is it that's going on for them or within their particular level of the system? Again, remember, as a leader, you have visibility over far more levels of that system than other people do. And so your mental capacity to sort of drill down and go, what are they seeing? Why does this seem so important? What is some of the context I could give them that doesn't make them feel that I've just written them off and ignored them, but actually says, here's why this is not something we're going to focus on at the moment. That would be a critical piece of reading the audience and understanding what they can see of the system.
Can you give me an example from your experience of a leader who's done this very well, what you're describing?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because when we think about context and then vision, often people come to mind who are good at one of those pieces, not necessarily two. So there's lots of visionary leaders who kind of paint this picture and want to draw people on that journey, but haven't actually read the context well. So the example that comes to my mind is actually of the opposite, but it's around when I did my master's many years ago. I was focusing on a whole bunch of really interesting things around counterterrorism and leadership and how we actually draw people to that vision that we have. And I studied 3 leaders of a country in the Pacific where they had recently come into independence, come out of really intense situations where they were, guerrilla warfare kind of type leaders. And what they did, they had this incredible vision of where they wanted their country to go, but failed to read the context in that. What they were doing was using their preference of leadership. So they were really good at being that charismatic leader that got people on board. And they did not read the context that now they were in a country that had achieved independence, that needed stability. And in a business context, we often have that same piece, different phases of our business. You might have in the early stages needed to be that charismatic leader who just, told people what to do and they would follow. But the misreading that these leaders had was no longer being able to see that, the leadership style or approach I took that worked previously is not working now, because we need to do the hard work of getting the systems and processes in place, having structure and management. And that connection I've seen over and again in the last 20 years in a business space of, as a leader, the importance of reading context is that your personal preferences of leadership style or any of those kind of aspects are not the key driver of whether you'll be successful or not. You need to adapt to the system and the setting that you're in. And so that piece is where it becomes critical, because otherwise we keep doing what we've always done and we wonder why we feel frustrated and why people don't understand what we're doing. And that, I think, so the downside of not reading context is actually a really good lesson in a business context as well.
Sure. So what is a method of decision-making that you found to be very helpful in these complex situations for a business owner?
So the method that we use is called decision cascades. And what it's about is starting to find ways to really identify what is most important here. So if we think of that aspect of searching for significance, we can see all of the moving parts. As a leader, one of the things you will be good at is spotting opportunities quickly, seeing what needs to happen. So that sits in a first level category if you think of the old what, so what, now what, seeing all the moving parts or the decisions that need to be made is really sitting in the what category. You can see those things. The decision cascade is about helping you to figure out what of those things, where does significance sit? Where are my priorities? Which of these things are more central than others? Because the reality is they are not all important.
So let me sort of role play one for you. So let's say I own a construction company and I have an opportunity to take on a project that is in a different geography from the one that I'm currently in. Maybe it's with a client that I like working with. It's with a project type that I'm good at, but it's in a new geography. So that means I've got to get new relationships with suppliers and subcontractors. The risk element has increased. Mm-hmm. How might I use the decision cascade to work through a scenario like that?
So there's a few aspects. You want to look at both mapping out all of the decisions that you feel are part of coming to an action point with that.
Right.
And then figure out both which pieces are aligned for you as a business to where you're wanting to go, and which pieces then are most conceptually higher up the system, if you like. So, for example, the conceptual piece is saying, if there's 15 different decisions in whether or not we go into this new geography,
right?
Are there some of those that by making that first, the other pieces drop out? So, for example, if we can't even get key partnerships in that new location, it's irrelevant whether we want to operate on the ground, because me starting to think about which of my team members could I send there doesn't matter, because we don't have access to key partnerships. So it's the teasing apart of conceptually which decision comes first. And that can be a really nice first way to level or structure importance. Can be, is there a decision here that actually other decisions can't be made until that is made? So sequence is important.
Okay.
On the level of as a business, you want to also be pushing up, are there certain things that are central to us or important? Do we have a sense of culture or how we make decisions here that has to be taken into account in the prioritization of these decisions? So if as a company, you've actually been under a lot of pressure for the last 5 years and you have committed to your team that we are not going to be making you be traveling, big distances or being away from your family for extended periods of time, you might then say, okay, well, actually, for this chapter that we're in as a business, we already know that unless we can have the partnerships and hire a completely new team in that geography, it is not aligned with our business for us to take this work on. So looking at the conceptual and the business alignment can help sort out that significance piece at your first level.
I understand that. Okay. So, so the idea then is identifying the decision, which will then affect another series of decisions, and understanding where to start. So not starting further down the chain, but going back up to going as far up as you can, and then seeing how those structures cascade from there. Is that correct?
Exactly. Because what can often happen is if we make a decision first up that is not actually central, it constrains all of our following decisions. So if we make a decision about the way, if we already say, okay, I'm going to hire someone to figure out and to start breaking into that new market or that new geography, the fact that I've actually committed a cost structure to that I've already hired someone, that I've already spent money, means that I will start forcing myself into a certain way of making this decision. And so those pieces are important because it can limit the next decisions, or it can really shrink in the way we look at a new opportunity. And also it can mean that you end up doubling up and spending money or time more times over, because you have to come back and revisit that decision later because the sequence wasn't right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we were talking offline just before we got started about a decision you made in your personal life that you use the Cascade method around. Can you explain that a little bit, just to give us a little more context?
Yeah, sure. So the example I was talking about was when our kids were younger and we were thinking about did we both try to have intense careers where we were traveling and where we were doing different things? And at a personal level for us, the priority came down to, we didn't have kids for someone else to raise them, and we wanted one of us to be a primary caregiver, if you like, to be present with the kids while they were young.
Yeah.
And so that pushed off a whole bunch of decisions. That meant that suddenly it wasn't actually, which jobs did we take, and where, it meant we started at the point of saying, we want one of us to be with the kids while they're young.
Right.
So then it made us it pushed down to secondary level a whole bunch of other things that could have driven our decisions. So we could have said, at the same time, we were thinking about, where did we want to buy a house? What kind of cars did we want to have? What schools would we send our kids to? But by making that primary decision, it then meant we realized, well, if we commit to a house that requires us to have a mortgage where we're both earning, we suddenly have flipped things to the wrong order. So let's buy a house that we can afford with one of us having a salary. Let's send our kids to the public school so that we don't have to have the salaries that require the level of both of us working. We sold one of our cars. So we pushed to secondary level decisions that if we had let them drive things, we sort of would have suddenly been trapped in a situation where our focus was not able to drive our decisions. Instead, we had made secondary and tertiary decisions primary, and now we felt constrained, which is what you see in businesses all the time, or people's personal lives. You suddenly have commitments that limit decisions which actually would have been more fulfilling and aligned with your strategy or with your personal kind of values. So it was pushing those things down the cascade and saying, we are having as this primary decision being with the kids, and then everything else flows from there. So our decision was, actually the best person to be at home was my husband. So we then had to have decisions below that were about, how do we make sure he's not bored and that he's actually engaged because he has a PhD, he's a clever man. What's the intellectual stimulation? How does he have adventures? So you have to then flow down each decision to say, how do we make this sustainable? How does this actually work? But always coming back to asking the question, are we starting at the right place so that what is truly important gets made, that decision gets made first, and it will flow from there. So it's the old piece of put the big rocks in first, don't fill up with the sand and pebbles. How do you ensure that the right pieces get attention? And with decisions and the amount of decisions that we have as business owners, that is critical, because otherwise the busyness will take over and we'll suddenly realize we're not on track with our strategy or our revenue plans. We aren't in the right place, but we have made commitments and decisions that lock us in to pieces that are not getting us where we want to go.
So that's interesting. So what I'm hearing here is that if I'm going to get good at this decision making from a business point of view, I need to be very clear about what my business strategy is, and
Absolutely.
also the values that drive the way that I do business. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, indeed.
Why do you think businesses struggle sometimes with that strategic direction? What are some of the sources of that struggle?
I think as leaders, it comes down to our strengths are our weaknesses. So the piece that is deeply part of who we are, that we want to drive to action, that we're good at making decisions, that we will take on board things that other people would be scared of doing. Our risk appetite is higher. Those aspects are great and a part of how we succeed and how we make things happen that others would not do. But at the same time, it can mean that we fall into that trap of mistaking movement for progress. So we think by being busy and doing lots of things, we are making progress. And I suppose the thing that you learn over time, and that comes with wisdom and experience, is that to stop and get clarity up front about who you are and want to be as an organization, what does that actually look like, and the aspects of that bigger picture strategy of, like, where are we going? What would success look like for us as an organization? To get clear on those things mean that when we flip into that action mode, that achiever mode, making it all happen, we can make very quick decisions, but they will be aligned. So it's not about saying, let's just always have really long, drawn out conversations, but it's saying clarity up front allows you to be efficient and effective and move quickly rather than what I see very often is we'll make a quick decision, but then we will have 6 months of stress after that because it wasn't a very good decision. And now you've got the pressure of all of the consequences of a poorly made decision because you did not have clarity and you could not figure out in amongst all of the moving pieces what was most important to focus on.
Yeah. So if I have clarity on my strategy, my values, those types of things, then that will help me to go through the complexity or filter the complex inputs that I'm getting all the time through different business situations or the loud voices, and focus in on what's most important for my company.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, Bessi, in your experience, what are some of the best ways to do strategy, to figure out that strategy? What are some of the best questions? What are some of the best methods that you've used with your clients or you've seen other companies use over the years?
I mean, I am a big fan of the old saying, strategy is saying no to good things. So
Right.
it's that the piece of just because something sounds like a good idea or could have a great outcome doesn't mean that you should do it because there's plenty of great opportunities out there. So the first piece around strategy for me is that aspect of having such clarity that you will be brave enough to say no to good things and really focus on that end prize of where you are trying to get to.
Right.
The next piece is really around some of these aspects of as we focus on where we want to get to, you need to be able to reverse engineer back from that and figure out whether what you're actually doing today, if you took it to its logical end, right? So often we're so busy that we don't run it through and go, okay, I'm spending all the money in the business here. I've hired these roles. We're focusing on these projects. Run scenarios. So strategy for me, and part of your job as a leader, is you should be thinking multiple steps and multiple timeframes ahead of other people. So you need to look at what's happening, look at the activity in the business today, run that through to its logical end, play the scenario out and say, what we're doing now, is it going to get us where we want to go? And I like in strategy to do that dance between running scenarios forward, so running it to its logical end, and then reverse engineering it back from a goal. So in different situations I've found with clients and myself, one of those will be more effective and give you insights in a better way. So being able to do both is useful. Have the vision, reverse engineer to what you should do now,
right?
Or look at what you're already doing and what you're committed to and run it forward and check, does it get you where you want to go? So I think those are some of the pieces that I love using from a strategy point of view, because it grounds us to not seeing strategy as on paper a disconnected, let's think about great things we could do, but it deeply connects it back to the actual activity of the work we have to do. What does this look like in action, and how do we ensure that the strategy makes sense?
So how do you, let's look at this, the run it forward perspective, because, you know, it's correct to say that leaders need to see 2, 3, 4 steps ahead, but perhaps, you know, as a leader, that's not one of my strengths. I might be able to do the vision part very well, but I may not necessarily be able to do the ramification part.
Sure.
What are some methods or strategies I could use to help get better at that running it forward perspective?
Sure. So I think there's 2 pieces that come to mind. One is there's a great book called Who Not How. And I think as a leader, you need to figure out those components where rather than always going, how do I do this? You think, who is best placed to do this? It's okay if as a leader, you're not very good at that really detailed planning or the mapping out of how are we going to get there. But who is best placed to do that? It may be that you have a 2IC or you have someone who's very operational, whose brain operates like that. And part of what you do is work together on those types of projects for you to set the vision and say, I've got a rough sense of how we're going to get there, but I need your help to really flesh this out from a scenario point of view and be able to see, what am I missing? How do we do this better? So as a leader, our job is not always to be the answer, but to be able to identify where we find that answer or who can help us figure that out. So I think that's a really important shift as a leader, is to not see that you have to be the answer to everything, because the more complex, the bigger the business, the bigger the projects, you can't possibly have that breadth of experience. So I would start with that and thinking, who do I need to sort of bring in? The second point would be around, if we go back to why it's so important to know yourself, know your values, know your vision.
Yep.
When you know yourself well as a leader, you can communicate those aspects to your team. So for example, for me, I love strategy. I love painting that big picture vision, but I really think in chapters or horizons. I don't go into the level of detail in each of those horizons or chapters about exactly step by step what will happen, but I can tell you the heading of that chapter or the naming of that horizon. I kind of go, there's going to be 4 steps. These are the chunks of what's going to happen to get us there. But I know that about myself, so I don't try and be something I'm not, or focus on the weaknesses. I'm very much a strengths-based person, like figure out what you're good at and then bring people into your team who complement that. So I think those would be the 2 pieces I would recommend leaders to think about: who, not how, and then know yourself and just own where you're good, lay out what you can of that scenario, and then get others on your team to really flesh it out and work with you to make sure you've thought it through.
Interesting. Okay, excellent. Okay, so let's say I've found myself in a situation where I've made an important decision in the business, and I've seen it begin to run out and to play out, so to speak. And I discover that I've made the wrong decision. Okay. What do I do then?
This is such an important thing, because the reality is it's going to happen. You will make decisions that don't play out the way you think they will.
Yep.
We are living in such a fast-moving environment. The last 2 years have shown us that all the scenarios you played would never have anticipated what was coming. So the challenge here is to not see any of these tools or frameworks or strategies. If you think about those aspects, even in the way you talk about your work, of that 1% of inspiration, don't think of these tools as being something you do once and then you've got the answer. So in this work, we always talk about whether it's business modeling or business planning or any of those strategies, there's always an ing, there's an ing at the end of it. We're not doing a business model once, right, laminating it, putting it on the wall, and that is our business model. Right. We're not doing business planning once, it's planning. So we're learning the tool, we're learning the strategy, the way to think. And that equips us to not have the fear of, oh my goodness, what if I make the wrong decision? I use that framework. Now, when it plays out, that I get, a few months in and I realize, actually, I thought that was the most important thing, but the whole market has shifted, or I misread how my team would actually deliver on this project. Just go back to the same framework. Use the components of the culture or the values of the business. Use the conceptual leveling of saying which decision needs to come first, yes, and revisit it. When it changes, your decisions and behavior should change. So again, as a leader, we need to be able to make decisions quickly, which is where having alignment and clarity up front is important. But we also need to have the level of humility to say, well, it did not play out how I thought it would. Let's shift and change. Digging your heels in and just sticking to a decision is actually the worst thing you can do as a leader. It will cost you money and time, and you're only going to have to revisit it down the track. So use the framework, use the skill to just pick that up quickly, go through the process again.
Okay, so that's interesting, because you make a very important point there about we are learning a way of thinking, a way of approaching our businesses. And I just want to make sure I've got the order right here. You begin with your vision or your culture. That then helps you to figure out which are the most important decisions. That cascade of decisions then leads to a series of actions, which then gives you feedback. And you can then decide which ways you may need to realign, whether you double down on a decision or put up your hands and say, we were wrong on this. But because you've learned that way of thinking, then you can keep going and iterating through the process with confidence that you'll eventually get to where you want to go to. Did I hear that right?
Absolutely. And it allows you in responding when things don't feel comfortable or they're not quite working, because you've laid out that sequence of decisions, it allows you to, even with the person who might be struggling with it, come back to, so I'll use the personal example I gave before of when our kids were young. So at moments in that last sort of 12 years where, say, my husband would say, I'm bored out of my brain, I don't want to do this anymore, we would go, okay, we acknowledge that. Let's look back at the decision. Do we still want one of us to be with the kids? And we'd say, yeah, we do. Okay, are you still the right person to be there? Yes, I am. Okay, so something at that third level down is not working in terms of how we make this sustainable for you. What do we need to do for you to actually not feel so bored and overwhelmed here? We've got to fix it, but it doesn't mean we have to go back and change the first decision. We don't suddenly have to go, okay, we're both going to be on a plane constantly, never at home with the kids. No, don't jump back to the first decision. Ask the questions to check, are we still in the alignment around the first decision, and then fix it at the level of system it actually exists. Because so often when we feel stressed or under pressure, we throw everything out and we go right back to square one, when actually just by using that strategy, you can see where the problem lies, fix it at that level, and don't escalate it.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So you begin by again, and I just want to reiterate this because what you just said there was very important. You have the big picture decision that you've made. This is what we want, and then the cascades come down from there. And like you said, there's secondary decisions and then tertiary decisions, and you need to pinpoint the place of pain in your current situation so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that's what we do under pressure. We go, this is not working. It's like, oh, hang on, at which level is it not working?
That's interesting. Because so for instance, like if I'm running my business and I'm struggling on a project, right? And I'm building a project and it sucks. I might think I'm never going to do that project again. Hold on a second. What about if you've got the wrong people involved in the project? And you need to switch the people out and that'll fix the issue. Or perhaps you have processes in place that are not working. And so instead of saying, I'm never going to do that project again, I'm never going to work with those people again, perhaps it's a matter of process or the people that I've put on the project that will help to fix the issue. That's interesting. Okay, that's very, very helpful. Bessi, let me ask you, what have you, just to shift the interview here a little bit, what have you achieved that's unusual for your peer group?
I think the most unusual thing for me is that I love to operate at two extremes of the system. So there's a lot of people who do in my space. So I've been in the impact investment space, the building capacity of organizations, small and medium enterprises, to actually help them figure out how they can integrate doing good in their business. Because for me, I'm very passionate about business has an incredible role to play in the world. But what I've found is people tend to either be a big picture person, so they work on huge projects or with government and big funders in my world, or they work down at the level of an individual business and working on the strategy at that level. My approach has been that I love both ends of that spectrum. And part of what I bring is that I can understand the whole system. I work with governments, I work with huge international funders around building environments for businesses to actually flourish. But I still do the work of, I'll travel across the Pacific Islands and sit in the dirt with a coconut farmer and understand how their business works at that grassroots level. And so when I make a suggestion, I'm an advisor to governments. When I am having those conversations, unlike someone who's just academic and disconnected from the reality, I'm able to tie it right back down to how an individual business owner operates. And that, to me, that uniqueness of bridging both ends of that system is where the power comes of, I can see things in a different way to someone who sits in an office all day and doesn't understand business. But when I'm working with a business, I can be pragmatic and say, here's how you need to play the system because this is how it actually works. So that would be the unique angle I bring.
Interesting. What's the most courageous thing you've ever done?
It probably is the aspects of where I go. So I've spent a lot of time in places like Papua New Guinea by myself, out in the middle of the highlands, very remote, obviously with security in a place like that, but it's the aspect of I'm a practitioner. So I never want to be someone who's giving academic advice on things I don't actually understand. I've built multiple businesses. I know what that feels like. I've been out with communities that are really struggling to operate. And so I don't just have an opinion about that. I know what it looks like on the ground. So for me, it's the practitioner in me and being willing to just go where the action is and speak from a place of understanding, not just opinion.
Interesting. What is one mainstream or consensus view that you wholeheartedly agree with?
That I agree with. Oh Lord, I'm the queen of saying what I disagree with. Probably the aspect of the broad concept of it takes a village to raise a child. And I, for me, take that into not just raising children, but every aspect of life. So it's the view that says no one person is the answer to any big thing.
Okay, I like that. What is one thing that you believe to be true that other people you know think is crazy?
Probably the deep belief that you can do good and make money at the same time. You do not have to choose, am I going to contribute, so therefore I have to work for a nonprofit, or I have to go and give all my money away, or if I'm running a business, it's purely about making profit. I don't believe that. I'm very much someone who loves bringing contradictions back together and saying, who says you can't do both those things? And I love proving that you can.
When someone says something like that, this is a thought that pops into my head is the entrepreneur who makes a bunch of money in a relatively selfish manner, who then gives back as a way of assuaging their guilt.
Yes, indeed. There's plenty of those.
Right.
So to me, I would put that in the category. I think there's 3 misconceptions we can have about something like legacy. So that idea of giving back and contribution. The common misconceptions I see, one, usually I put it as the 3rd example, but is the one you just gave. So it's people who have actually really taken advantage of other people to succeed. They've trodden on people's faces. They've acted without integrity. And then at some point they get that sense of like, oh, I'll use the power and money I have to atone for my sins and pretend I'm a good person.
Right.
And that category, I'm not a fan of. There's also 2 other categories that people can accidentally fall into with legacy. So one of them is around that aspect of they work really hard to be a good person, but it's based on what other people, society or others project onto them of what that looks like. And it's not deeply informed by what they feel fulfilled to do or what they care about. So it's purely an outside-in approach to legacy, which is a tricky kind of place to be.
Right.
And then the second category that people can fall into is a little bit like what I just hinted at before with the doing good and making money.
Right.
It's this idea that they've swallowed without questioning the thought that legacy or contribution has to be completely about the other. It has to just be generous, selfless. I just give and none of it is about me. And that leads to people falling into a bit of the martyrdom and burnout because they end up feeling guilt. For example, they might have built a business, have a stack of cash because they've just sold it. And suddenly you see them talking about, oh, I'm going to give it all away. And it has to be selfless. There's a discomfort with money and legacy. And so those 3 kind of downsides of legacy, I see that all the time with people. And that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about legacy.
So what is in your mind the ideal way for someone to be, someone to make money and do good?
So it comes back for it to be sustainable over time, because the reality is that to actually create real change, you need to play a long game. And if you think about the types of people who are running businesses, who have this kind of approach to life, they also are not going to just be sitting around. They don't want to work for 5 years, earn a bunch of money, and then sit around and do nothing, right? So we're going to have a long period that we are at work in the world.
Right.
And so the idea of, say, a double-sided legacy, where you say it needs to honor and respect you as an individual. So we have to do the work to figure out what would be fulfilling for you. Mm-hmm. What does success look like for you as an individual, not what others tell you it looks like? Because chances are you've probably already ticked all those boxes and people think you're successful, but you don't necessarily feel fulfilled. So there's the personal work around success and fulfillment and what a legacy is that's uniquely yours. But we can't just stop there. or else we can fall into the category of thinking, good intentions are good enough and it's all about us, and that's not the case. So the second part of that double-sided legacy is figuring out, from an impact point of view, what do you want to contribute to in the world? So if your passion is about education, or it's about young people having opportunities from really difficult backgrounds, okay, how do we use that and have it as a common theme amongst all of the work that you're doing, and bring all those pieces together, but do that in a way that we actually have taken that approach I talked about before of running it to its logical end, reverse engineering, figuring out, are the things I'm contributing to, whether that's in how I spend my time, whether that's in how I'm using my talent, or versions of the old treasure piece. So whether it's how I invest money or give money, is there a logical connection between all of those things that gives me confidence that I am actually making a difference to the areas I care about? Because if we don't actually know what that success point looks like, and we don't know how we would know if we got there, or whether we're trending in the direction of that impact in the world, we can just fall into that trap of, again, we hear a friend is doing a charity raising for this kind of topic, and so we go, oh, well, I've got some cash, I'll give them cash.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that may not be aligned with what you're actually trying to be part of. So they would be the ways that I'd think about a double-sided legacy.
So you it's interesting, because you identify those three areas of time, talent, and treasure, and then aligning those with an area that you actually have some interest in and that you have a passion about. And then if you're aligning your passion or your area of interest with your time, talent, and treasure, you're saying that's where you'll find that fulfillment that people are looking for.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Bessi, how can people get in touch with you?
So the two kind of best ways to do that is to either go to my website, bessigraham.com, or if people just want to listen a bit more and suss it out, I also have a podcast called Both and with Bessi Graham.
Excellent. Excellent. And so we'll put links in the show notes to both of those. Just tell us a little bit more about what you do with businesses, just so people know that in a little more clarity, please.
Yeah, sure. So as I said before, I've built a number of different businesses, but the main focus for me at the moment is around the coaching work I'm doing one-on-one and in group programs with high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, and really established leaders, business owners, who are at that kind of crossroad where they're saying, I tick all the boxes, I look successful, I've made it, but I'm not feeling that fulfillment. And so my coaching work is really to help people bring those different aspects of their life and work together and channel them effectively so that legacy is uniquely theirs and actually feels fulfilling.
And if people want to get in touch with you regarding that, they can go to your Bessi Graham website?
They can, yes, and just connect with me there.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes. Bessi, I appreciate your time. You've been very generous. Thank you for your insights that you shared with us today.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Bessi today. Before you jet off, I have a quick request. Please give Construction Genius a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps us to be seen across the interwebs. We have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on Apple. So go over there, and if you think we've earned a 5-star, click that 5-star rating and then write a short review. And if you don't have Apple, but you have Spotify or Google, that's fine as well. Wherever you get your podcasts, please just take a couple of minutes, give us that rating or a review, and share the show with other people. Really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you listening, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode.